I'm John Fox from the Energy Systems Catapult. I'm going to try and keep this brief, as everyone has said before. So I work on business models at the Catapult. I've got a couple of slides really quickly so you know what the Energy Systems Catapult is. I won't dwell on that too much. There are 10 catapults in the UK. They were set up by the coalition government, and they are to try and help innovation and growth, economic growth in key areas. So there's things like high value manufacturing, energy systems, transport systems. We are the Energy Systems Catapult. Our vision is to see the energy system overcome systemic barriers. We are looking to unleash innovation. We want to make all of the fantastic intelligence and knowledge and products and services that the UK is so well known for actually make it to market. Because for very good reasons, there's a lot of regulation in the energy industry, but that regulation isn't necessarily, let's say, conducive to the future that we're trying to see now. So a lot of this is going to be overlapping what's previously been said, but essentially as we move towards electric heating, while we wait on the big hydrogen question to be answered, all of the future energy scenarios that Barney mentioned see peak demand and increasing. So it's true to say it has been decreasing, but it's not going to continue to go that way. All four scenarios on there, all of them to a varying degree, are increasing peak demand. And there is a level of assumption for, let's say, time of use incentivization of moving demand for electric vehicles, etc. Peak demand aligns to human behavior, so I think we've seen this in both of the charts already. It's when you get up in the morning and it's when you come home from work at night, and it's industrial use during the day. So there's a winter to summer variation with an extra heat demand, but generally it's similar kind of shape. And as we start to see more cooling needs, you might find that the winter and summer don't look as different as they do now. Interesting stat here. More renewable energy means that carbon intensity varies a lot in day. We can't make the wind blow and we can't make the sun shine, and it's not always windy and sunny. So this is a chart from the National Grid from their future energy scenarios work, and it's a 2-day run showing the carbon intensity across that 2 days. So it's under 150 grams CO2 per kilowatt hour at midnight on the first day, and it peaks up at, reading that off, 400 over on the second day. That's in the space of 2 days. So the amount of carbon that you produce by using electricity does have a time-based element to it. And there's a philosophical point in this around the supply-demand relationship and how that's changing. So the system that we had maybe 20, 30 years ago was that demand was what demand was, and we would turn things on and burn things essentially to make sure that we met that demand. Renewables, unfortunately, you can't switch on and off, as I've already said, and for that reason, being able to actually flip that and make demand follow supply is something that increasingly becomes important. So if you're able to harvest energy when low carbon renewable sources are providing it, great, and then try and essentially not harvest energy when that's not the case, then obviously that's very good. Now, I wanted to give some kind of talk about this. Flexibility essentially is what we're talking about here. It's a word that I've made in bold for good reason. Flexibility is very important. If you can flex your demand and your peak takeaway from the grid, then you can really impact your carbon intensity and potentially the cost to run your home or business. So why has this not happened already? Well, the first one is the cost of doing it. It's quite complex. You've got to keep an eye on all sorts of statistics that I don't think many people are interested enough, even if the data is available, to stare at. But digitalization is starting to knock that down. So there's businesses going out now trying to manage people's energy demand in industrial space because they're a big enough customer to warrant that cost. And we're doing a lot of projects around domestic. And that scale with, let's say, device classes and various kind of algorithms being done digitally without a lot of humans having to pay attention is actually not as expensive anymore as it would have been. The other side is the benefit. So obviously for anything to work there needs to be a cost-benefit equation that stacks. Benefits are largely socialised. There's a very good reason for that, lots of social reasons why we wouldn't want to strand people who are not able to do these things, but what it means is if I do something really good for the grid in my area that costs me a lot of money, I don't reap the rewards of that because the benefit is socialised across everybody's bills to a fraction of a penny. So everyone's in a state of paralysis where they can't get a return on their innovation, and as I say, there's good reason for these regulations, but the system is changing. There are a lot of energy market reforms being discussed. It wouldn't be my place to suggest where they will end up or what the right answer to any of them is, but it's acknowledged that there is a need to start rewarding this flexibility and to start lowering carbon intensity one way or another. There needs to be an economic signal for essentially carbon reduction being a cost-effective thing to do. We are looking at time of use charging and payment essentially based on when you use energy. So it basically means that when energy is used starts to impact the bill in the future more than the amount you use. Now, as a kind of philosophical metaphor, if you consider how the oil industry works, essentially a barrel of oil is worth something. That is a commodity that you can sell. If you think of the water industry, a barrel of water is worth nothing, but we pay for both of those things. Your bill for your oil is based on the amount that you use. Your bill for your water does have an element of measurement in it for new homes to try and stop you kind of using too much and being wasteful, but you're really paying for the infrastructure. So your bill for your water really reflects the cost of the infrastructure to deliver it. There is no marginal cost in real terms other than kind of the additives, etc. So what that basically means is if you contribute to peak demand in energy in a world where we move to renewables, you are essentially being billed for the infrastructure because the wind doesn't cost anything and the sun doesn't cost anything. And that starts to change the relationship and why flexibility starts to become quite important. So I've put a chart there which is taken from Electric Insight's great website. There's others that do similar things just to demonstrate. I chose a day when I was doing this presentation. I can't read the date, but it was early February. Just to take a look. So it's a 24-hour run. And I've highlighted and kind of blown up some numbers. So you can see the emissions there, the grams per kilowatt hour of CO2 varying quite significantly, 140 grams to 230 grams within the day from 4 a.m. to 6 p.m. The price as well, the wholesale price of the energy, £24 per megawatt hour through to £45 per megawatt hour essentially. Now that, to 75 pounds per megawatt hour, huge swing in the cost there. In fact, it's confused me because it's now flipped to be the larger number. I mean, that obviously, those that know how energy is bought, essentially you actually buy years ahead the vast majority of the energy, and that's part of the problem that we have, is that not a lot of energy is actually bought on the spot market. It's more of a balancing equation. But what that's saying is that if you were able to make people move their energy use, the actual primary cost of energy at that point is wildly different in day. Now you might think, okay, 4 a.m. to 6 p.m, that's a long time to shift demand, but on this particular day, it doesn't have to be that far apart actually. So 45-minute difference there, and the cost of the energy essentially doubled, and the carbon intensity changed quite significantly as well. And it's worth kind of pointing out, if you look at the right-hand line and cross-section in there, the reason for that is not because the wind stopped blowing. In fact, the solar has appeared, and there is more wind, which is the blue section. The reason is because the demand line went up quite significantly, and that was picked up by gas peaking plants. So we had to fire something up where we burn some fuel because we have to meet the demand, and the wind and sun doesn't deliver. So where is flexibility value in buildings? We are not the building systems catapult, so I'm not going to preach to people who know an awful lot more about these things than I do. But essentially, if you can do something to move your grid import around, even without storage, that's actually very helpful. You can defer some demands. So people talk about demand-side response a lot, and there is an element of benefit from that, though I would suggest that the level to which people are willing to move their meal times and things is probably limited. Batteries provide amazing flexibility. All of your demand can be moved, or your electricity demand can be moved with that, but they are expensive. I think Barney touched really nicely on the point that vehicles are actually a mobile fleet of batteries that we will all be willing to pay for in a way that we probably aren't yet willing to pay for just a domestic battery that sits somewhere under the stairs. So there's an opportunity there, but in terms of being able to design the system to let's say, require this or to take advantage of it, there are challenges because that is a moving fleet of vehicles, and the ability to defer infrastructure investment is limited. That said, there will be a lot of second life batteries that start to become available from vehicles. With heating demand, there's actually some natural flexibility in the building, and I spotted the kind of concrete area earlier where they're talking an awful lot about latent heat, and I agree with the points they're making there about the fact that you can actually sink heat or cool, in fact, into a building. That's starting to have some impact in the industrial commercial space. We did, and I'm just going to really briefly touch on, I'll keep an eye on the time, an example that we looked at of doing that with domestic buildings. So we used a tool that we got to do some demand side management on reduction of bills. We took some half-hourly pricing, red, amber, green bands for Duos charging, which is the domestic distribution network operator. We chose some existing house archetypes from our modelling database, And we basically took 1,000 homes that had heat pumps added and did heat as a service. So we gave them the warm time that they wanted before, but we moved the heating demand to reach the set point temperature forward to a lower cost time. And what we basically did was we made the homes warm when they were before. They actually got warmed a little bit earlier. Now more energy was used, but the network benefits were apparent and the bills reduced. So I've got a summary slide there. So it's basically, when we didn't do demand side management, we applied this and let the houses do their normal thing. The heating bill for the heating season that we used was £390. Well, actually, when we did our particular assessment, the average was £378. It's not a lot, let's be honest, but we are using buildings that were not designed with this in mind. There is no thermal inertia deliberately built into these buildings, and doing some calculations with buildings that do have that demonstrates there's a pretty huge shiftability there that you could use. We reduced the maximum consumption, which was the idea. The reason there's an asterisk is just because there's occasional spikes, but wires and transformers can take very short spikes that are over limit, as long as it's not for minutes. And average energy use, yeah, it actually went up by 5%. But we didn't do the calculations, but I'm quite confident the carbon intensity would have reduced quite significantly because you're moving away from those peaking plant hours. I won't dwell on this. This was essentially saying that on the Saturday, which is the day on the far left there, this kind of shows the peaks Barney was talking about. No time of use price, so the algorithm didn't do anything with the heating, and you still had the peak the same as before. On the weekdays, which you can see with the green circles there, essentially what the algorithm was doing is it was spreading heating demand into an earlier time. But there's a really important caveat to this, which is that the colder it is, the higher the demand, and the higher the demand and the cold outside, the faster the building loses heat. And what that means is that on a Beast from the East style weekend, this does not get you over the line, and this does not give you the benefits. So there may still be a role for gas in a hybrid system to make sure that we've got that seasonal storage to cover off these events, to make sure that we don't put all our eggs in that one basket. Batteries and V2X, won't touch on this too much. I think Barney did it justice, and Justin, essentially saying that what you're trying to do is flatten your demand curve or even invert it to help the grid, but you need economic signals to do that. Vehicle to grid, vehicle to house, things like that are great opportunities. If the market develops, you turn your vehicle from part of the problem, as Barney said, into part of the solution. So in conclusion, efficiency comes first. I'm not for a minute suggesting we should start using more energy, but actually as things move on in the future, your carbon intensity and your, let's say, impact on the grid may mean that using more, but at better times, is actually the right thing to do. And so making sure a building's EV ready, as we've already said, making sure that where you're using electric heating, which is at the moment the future direction for low carbon, you are connecting controls, and where you've got any ability to sync energy, whether it's a battery, whether it's heat storage, whether it's hot water storage, etc., then you should make sure that that is in your building, so that you have that flexibility. And whatever the future direction of those markets is, flexibility is going to be very, very valuable. And that's the end of my talk.